fluids, shall we say. That sounded way less nasty in my head, but go off. Hey, welcome to my video. If you're from my Instagram, I love you, and if you're not from my Instagram, love you all the same. Welcome to Monthly Book Club. It's a series here on my channel where I tell you exactly what I read each month and exactly what I rate it. As per usual, I'm really not here to be super rude. I am gonna be honest, tell you my honest opinion whether something worked for me or not, but I never want that to discourage you from reading a book if you wanted to. And that's because in my opinion, reading is just so subjective. The reason that I might hate a book might be the reason that you love it, and vice versa, and obviously we are both valid in our opinions, but that doesn't mean we have to be rude about it. So that's really never my goal here. Although I'm not gonna lie, sometimes we get a little snarky around here. And another thing, before we begin, I'm gonna pop some pictures up on the screen right now for you so that you can kind of tell why I rate things the way that I rate them. Obviously, this is all subject to change, the vibes, my mood, who knows what else, girl. But if that's the case, I usually do let you know. Okay, now let's get on with the video. So, little disclaimer, I really didn't end up reading a lot this month. That's mostly due to the fact that I was really busy, and then also I took a few days off because it was my birthday. So between those two things, I wasn't really in my groove like I normally am. So there's actually not enough material to do a rapid fire rating today, but I am gonna fully review the, I believe, 5 books that I read. Although I am reading 2 more, but I don't think I'll finish them by the end of this week at all. There's virtually no way. So we're just gonna mention those next month. But today we have to start with The Unwanted Marriage. So let's start with tropes. So first of all, this is a billionaire bad boy romance. It's also a contemporary novel and enemies to lovers. So it's about Dion and Faye, who've been engaged since they were children, and everything Faye did in her upbringing was basically to sort of please her future husband Dion, while at the same time Dion just sort of went and lived his life, and for years he's made his unwillingness to marry her and be with her known, but that did not change the fact that they still needed to do it. And then like a month before the wedding, he saw her with somebody else, and not just anybody, somebody he knows. And at that point, he decided that whether he likes it or not, she's his. And he gets all possessive and jealous and decides that he's finally done with running. And so obviously they end up getting married, and you can imagine what happens next. So now my rating. So I rated this 3 stars and 2 chili peppers. And honestly, 3 is kind of my average rating, but this book had problems that I've had with other books in the recent past way too many times. So honestly, at this point, I'm beginning to wonder, is it me? Am I the problem? So you might want to take that under advisement while listening to this review, but let me explain. So I mentioned this in, I believe, like 2, maybe even more of my last book club videos, but the Instalove that has been either going around recently or it's just recently started to bug me is crazy, girl. And with this book specifically, at around 22%, the main male character Dion says he's like so obsessed with the main female character, and I kind of don't get it because allegedly he's been ignoring her their whole childhood. He's actually been keeping her at an arm's length, so now all of a sudden he's just so obsessed, and I'm like, but you don't even know her. And already it felt a little insta-lovey to me personally. And again, that hasn't been the vibe for me lately at all. And this is a side rant, but like I get insta attraction, obviously, but when these main male characters say that they're so obsessed and they act so possessive and so jealous over a main female character who they barely or maybe sometimes don't even really know, sometimes they even call it love right out the gate, I'm like, girl, it's delusion, okay? And so it's really not my cup of tea. And so by like 27%, it said that this thing between them is, and I actually quote here, more than just lust. And honestly, it's kind of like crickets because you don't even know each other at all. So I don't see it. However, with that being said, I am such a simp for the I'm yours BS. Like, that's really how you get me. That's how you get me. That micro trope has a chokehold on me. And so I really did enjoy that part of it. And by like 57%, they still didn't have any deep talks whatsoever. And they really just know each other at a surface level Still, I will say that the smut is really good and enjoyable, and by the end, they do get to know each other a little bit more and they talk about each other's past, and they realize why the other is the way that they are. But I would have liked that to happen maybe in the beginning or middle at least, because every time they had a little love confession or whatever, I couldn't properly get into it because I was like, you don't know each other. And that's like fine, but then it doesn't, to me, explain how this thing is bigger than lust, you know? So that was my little side rant with the Instalove trope, but you know what? Overall, I did still enjoy this book. However, I believe that I have read previous books by this author and I liked some of them more than this one. Next up, we have Puppy Love. So let's start with the tropes. So this is a sort of queer rom-com and it's also considered to be a workplace romance. So it's about Violet and Cam, and Violet is getting a divorce and she's not planning on dating. She wants to stay as far away from love as possible, but she meets Cam at a random bar one night, and one thing leads to another and they sort of start hooking up in the bathroom. And then the next day, Cam finds out that Violet is actually her boss. Obviously, they're both mortified by this, right? How could this be? And they decide that they're not gonna break workplace policy by dating or hooking up or anything. However, obviously, pretty soon they start pushing the boundaries, shall we say, and then they start discovering that they might like each other more than they initially thought. So I was really excited to read this one. The cover also was very cute, but with that, I have to be honest, this was a 2-star rating for me, and on the spicy scale, 2 chili peppers. So mostly I thought everything was cute. However, I personally just wasn't feeling the dynamics between the main characters. I don't think it was the right vibe for what I needed to read at the time, and I didn't even realize it at the time. But now looking back, I feel like I needed a different vibe, and it wasn't this, because honestly, the dynamic between them was, I don't know, kind of dry, sarcastic. I would even maybe venture and say bratty. And I personally just really didn't like the way that Cam behaved in certain instances at all. For example, there's this one time that Violet is going through a pretty hard time and Cam makes it all about herself essentially. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that is because obviously I don't want to spoil in case you still want to read this. But yeah, it was kind of selfish of her and I didn't like that at all. By the way, if I'm ever looking down, I'm like checking my notes. But yeah, then at another point, I remember Cam being sort of rude to one of her friends, and her excuse here was her mental illness, but meanwhile, her friend has a mental illness as well. So like, I don't know how that works. Like, I'm not sure that was something relevant, but that was the excuse and I personally just wasn't vibing with it at all. And yeah, because I was kind of getting annoyed by some of Cam's behavior, I did end up skimming by the end of the book, I'm sorry to say. Don't kill me. Okay, moving on. Next we have The 9-Month Contract, and this is a contemporary small town romance. There is also an age gap and it's about Wyatt and Trista. So Wyatt wants to have a baby through surrogacy, but the agency is failing to find him an adequate candidate. He's rejected like 12 women that the agency suggested, and at that point they chose to dump him as a client essentially. Everly, his niece, meets Trista outside of that very clinic, and Trista is rejected by the same agency for being overweight. At that point, Everly tells her the situation. She tells her that she should meet with Wyatt, and long story short, they did end up meeting and decided they wanted to go ahead with the plan of Trista carrying Wyatt's baby. They end up creating a contract and doing it at home. She literally based herself with a turkey baster, and in their contract it also states that she can live there if she wants, and she does decide to go ahead with that option as well. So obviously you can imagine with the close proximity, things start to develop, and that's where I'll leave you. This one for me was 3 stars and 2 chili peppers. The first issue I had with this book was that some of the language chosen to describe private parts and, I don't know, fluids, shall we say, that sounded way less nasty in my head, but go off. Anyways, some of the language used to describe all of those things was kind of cringy to me. So for example, I hate when authors use the word channel for female private parts. There was also splooge, and then there was another one. It was like bajingo or bajigo, I forget, but it really took me out obviously that's a personal preference. Maybe you don't hate these words and don't find them cringy, but other than that, let's get into the story itself. For me, there was way too much like hot and cold back and forth vibes in this one, and I understood that because Trista in this book, the main female character, has a lot of baggage. So I understood where it was coming from, but I just personally didn't enjoy that. For example, Wyatt offered to help her 1,000 times, and it seemed like every single time up until like, I don't know, maybe the 90% mark or something crazy, she would always put up a fight. And again, I get it, but just wasn't for me. Also, the pacing of the book was off. At like 80%, she does decide that she also wants to have this baby, that she's not only gonna be a surrogate, but that she's gonna be the baby's mother and have this life and relationship with Wyatt on the mountain too. And it almost felt unrealistic to me based on the amount of baggage that she has, that literally up until that point, none of her baggage gets gradually solved or anything in that sense. It's like baggage until 80% of the book, and then she's like, okay, now I want to have this baby. And maybe I would have liked to read more about her, I don't know, internal struggle, about her actually gradually working out the baggage so that this would feel more realistic. Mind you, I know we're reading like romance novels up in this book club, okay? And a lot of the times, romance novels are not about the plot holes. They're not really about realism. They're literally fiction. And so I do understand that. But in some senses, for certain things, I needed to make sense in my head for me to be able to enjoy the read. And since this didn't make too much sense, that's also another thing that took me out of it a little bit. But again, I did not enjoy it. I gave it 3 stars. I just needed something different, something else. Do my brows, do something else, you know? Now we're moving on to the Kraken's Sacrifice, and I had sort of similar issues with this book as well, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's do tropes first. So this is a paranormal romance. So it's about Catalina who makes a deal with a demon. She does so because she really needs the money, and honestly, girl, at this point, you know what? I would too, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, she knows that the demons are supposed to treat humans in a good way, like they're not supposed to actually harm them or kill them, so she's like, what's the worst that could happen? Now, one thing she didn't anticipate though was being sold off to a Kraken. Yes, a Kraken. This is my first time reading about it. And he, Thane, is sort of cold and distant, but she ends up seeking out his company a lot of times, at which point he also starts discovering that he might not be as cold and as distant towards her. And obviously sparks fly whenever you smile. Okay, you get it. That, by the way, was in fact a Taylor Swift reference, and no, I cannot be stopped. The rating for this one, 3 stars, 2 chili peppers. Overall, the plot was interesting, and I really do like the main female character. She's sassy and funny, but I believe their relationship as a whole was sort of surface level once again, and same as in the previous book, the pacing was just off. Based on her individual and his individual baggage, it felt like everything was sort of just resolved too quickly in a way, and I really don't think they got to know each other on a super deep level. And again, not my vibe. However, I will say the book was very short, which is a good thing, but I also wouldn't have minded if it was longer. So that's that on that. Also, another tiny spoiler alert, I guess, this book has the accidental pregnancy trope, and I feel like I need to say that because I know some people really dislike that trope. I actually really like it if it's done well. Now, was it in this book? I mean, I don't know. Read it and let me know. Okay, and now for the last book that I read this month, Darkest Sins. So obviously this is a dark mafia romance, a contemporary novel as well, and it's about Nira? I'm not sure. You know how when you're reading, you read something in your head, but then when you tell it to other people, you realize you've been saying it wrong in your head the whole time? That's me literally all the time. But anyway, Nira and Kai, who meet by chance, and she actually does save him. What he doesn't know at the time is that she's a mafia princess, and what she fails to realize is that he's a ruthless hired killer. And so she saves him, she piques his interest, he starts protecting her from afar. It's called stalking, but work. And by this point, you know me, I'm already eating this up, gobbling it down. But yeah, basically he wants to stay in the shadows, but he also really wants to talk to her again. And so he finds a way, okay, he hurts himself to go to her job to have her patch him up again. And after that, he sort of periodically just comes and goes in and out of her life until one moment where they both decide that they don't actually want him to go. Does that not sound like the funnest plot ever? Yes, it does. Now, with saying that, I have to also say I gave this a 3 stars and 2 chili peppers yet again. What an average month February has been. Damn. I have to say what I loved about this book was the storyline, and I really did also love the MMC as well. But at times it felt like I was more invested in the storyline rather than the couple, since they actually spend more time apart than together. And around 75 to 80% of the book, it talks about their past, like how they met, how they got to know each other, and only then does it switch to their present. I personally would have preferred it the other way around, because I feel like that's one way that I could have been more invested into the couple, because the way that it was written, they essentially fell in love by meeting each other a few times over the span of a year, but they really didn't know much about each other. In fact, it was way later when he found out that she was a mafia princess. In my opinion, a little too late. And then there were also 2 major plot points in this book. So one, I'll say, was his darkest sin, and another, without spoiling it for you, was basically a bombshell that was dropped. And both of those things were such a big deal, but they weren't made up to be a big deal. Like, they were sort of just glossed over, and the reveal of those things kind of fell flat for me. So yeah, 3 stars, but I actually do love this author as well. Okay, and that's it for today's video. If you made it this far, you're a princess. Now, whether or not you're a mafia princess, that's on you to decide. But anyways, if you like this video, then please consider liking, commenting maybe, subscribing as well. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.